I want to explore something today. And, we've touched on it before in other retreats, and the movement towards trying to describe something that literally is indescribable is challenging. And so, sort of each time, I feel drawn to exploring this. It's like a phase of fully being absorbed back into your true nature. And in the Buddhist tradition, they call it the no self. Some other traditions, in fact, actually, not too many traditions talk about it. Or if they do, it's so wrapped up into, poetry and language that you have to be in this no self to be able even to understand what they're describing and what they're pointing to. The reason that I'm drawn to talking about it is, it happened here, is happening here some time ago. Aja put out a course, I guess you'd call it, called the No Self. And it was very beautifully designed and transmitted. And at the same time, it was happening here, but there was no understanding of actually what was going on. I knew that that sense of self-reflection was falling away, and that there was more of a, I don't know how to describe it, almost like more space in the head, right? The what we call the sky mind, or the uh, open spaciousness. Because the head, until it's realized, is very crowded with thoughts, past thoughts, future thoughts, current thoughts. And so it feels, if you really kind of bring your attention into the interior of your skull, you'll actually sense a kind of a thickness or a crowdedness. It's not spacious and open, right? And so, though the shift of identity had happened here some time ago, and my understanding at that time was that was it, and then there would just be kind of a liberation and clarification, but it was the same state, if I may use that word, that the shift of ego driven to the shift of the universal, more of the whole aspect of self drive, or moving the life. So I was completely ignorant that that was just also a phase. And so when I started to realize that there was less and less self-reflection, and what I mean by that, even though that shift into the separate, or to the reality of who you are, from the ego to, soul, universe, wholeness, whatever words you want to use. And for me, it was a very dramatic shift. I mean, it was a very, very dramatic shift. And so the pointer that Aja and many teachers talk about is you're literally in a different world. You aren't just hanging out into a more refined ego state. And so when that happened, I thought, well, cool, this is enough. And had full faith that it would just unfold and reveal. But again, there, even with that of a dramatic of a shift, there's still these arisings of the ego identification. It's almost like you have one foot in one world, and that's the prominent world. This awake awareness, no longer the separate identity. But you also kind of have another foot over here, and it's still a little bit into the ego structure. And so you're kind of, you can see, awareness sees what's going on when it goes back and forth, when it, kind of wobbles. It's aware of the trigger of when it goes back into the identification. And it's also aware when it comes out of it. And it's aware of what was actually going on when the unconsciousness and the identity happened. So it's not like, it's ignorant and asleep, though there can be those factors as well. The awareness is awake to 1 foot here and then 1 foot still karna, keeping yourself as you know yourself. And, that was going on, but I just noticed it less and less and less. And so that's what I mean by the self-reflection began to die out. But I didn't really know what was going on. And so, as it always happens, then life presents the perfect for this way of, of guidance and understanding what was happening. And for me, because I'm so deeply devoted to my teacher and trust him so much, that of course it was his course that came out at the same time. And I took that course, Nate and I both did. And it was just like, oh, there's something else that happens beyond and even more empty than the shift from the ego to the more universal self. So again, and I know I've told this story many times, but stay with me. We were invited then out to spend some time with Ajahn and Mukti, really at the same time. So then I got to be in his space because he lives as the no self. And then I got to ask him some questions about it. It's a beautiful gift and grace. So then on the way home, we stopped at in Arizona in Flagstaff. And they have this, what is it called when you look at the stars, observatory? And so we went in, and there was this, these images, these incredible photographs and everything. And of course, it's all about the dark holes. And so I walked up and looked at that, and then just entered completely in a way that had not ever happened before into that dark hole. That's why I think we're so fascinated with the dark holes, in the universe. So that just continued. So now I understood that, there is that from the ego to the sense of more universal self. And then there's another shift. And the other shift is very difficult to describe. It's written in very few places. It's really not even talked about, but it was very helpful because, I just said, yeah, there's 3 shifts actually. More than that, there's usually like that shift into either the everything, you see that you're everything, or if you're wired up in a certain way karmically, you'll maybe go into the deep silence. But if you go into the deep silence, there's another shift that will take you into the everything. And then from that wholeness, usually there's a period of stabilization and trying to live from that. And then the no self, which is the absorption of the identity, period, end of story. No one signs up for that because you can't conceive of it, you don't understand it. And it's the last thing that the ego wants. It wants all the goodies of the shift, right? Because there are incredibly wonderful gifts when you come from being directed by the separate ego with all of its fears and, angers and everything that it's composed of, into that is whole and loving and content and in awe. I mean, you can't believe, speaking for myself, that had such a neurotic mind and a very, sorrowful and unhappy mind, to come out of it, and it still would be arising, but it was arising from ground, from wholeness, from love, from awareness. So it was a very different way of living and moving in the world. Huge, 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 huge relief. That's when the dedication really gets going, because what would you dedicate your life for anything else but that? You get what's actually happening here, and you get to live it. But to begin to then also a sense of I or you, capital U, it still seems to continue on. And so you have your preferences, things that you really like about your ego. For some it's a brilliant mind, for others it's, an artist. For others it's sort of a, you're very kind and generous, and, people love you. And for others you have kind of a dharmic mission, and you're quite identified with that dharmic mission, in the world, a purpose. And so when this absorption starts to happen, and I'm moving it in the way that I experienced it, it would arise and it would come back and it would dissolve back into the home ground. And that particular identification or attachment to that was no longer there. So the roles I noticed, and I noticed that before this absorption started to take place, the roles of the idealism of mother, the condition of father, the idea of, a particular role that you play out in life. Those were all dissolved. And often there was a period of time, and I found that personally distressing, because it was a gap where instead of, my familiar love and conditioning of being a parent or a wife or a friend or, a teacher, anything, any role, it just fell away, and in its place was a dead spot. Nothing. And so I had this kind of a personal fear that I can remember way back in a tradition that probably was, in, karmic traditions, where you left your family, or you left your community, or, you separated yourself from life. And I knew that that wasn't my dharma. I wanted to, and it was like really unformed, but I had this strong, I don't know what it was, knowing maybe that the dharma here was to wake up in life, in relationship, in the community, in life as it is. And I don't know why that was there, but it was sort of always present. So it was painful, because not only was, instead of love for my children or, my partner or my friends or my life, it was just dead, nothing. Wasn't bad, it just was nothing. And so then always, after that kind of a dead period, then it would start to fill up. And it would fill up with love and connection. And so the relationship actually got much deeper, because it wasn't overlaid and separated out by the conditioning, my past conditioning. And you can have very wonderful conditioning. You're going to be the best parent in the world, or you can be, a total disaster. They're both conditionings. And of course, one is, better for you and the child, and the other is maybe more destructive, but they're both conditionings. So you become free of all the roles that had attached to certain conditionings. So that started to really speed up in this unfolding. And then I began to see that it was starting to mess around with what I loved about myself the most. And all of a sudden, my whole life, that since my first memory, was ashes. It meant nothing. My spiritual life, my love of God, my moving forward, what was most important in this life was just ashes. It was really, really difficult for me. I would say really the only real difficult period of this unfolding. And I try to talk with people because I'm pretty transparent. I don't hold back and, keep things to myself. I'll just say whatever's going on with me. And, but people would kind of go, she must not be very really awake. She has those problems. I can't believe she's saying that. And I go, yeah, but, my whole identity, it's gone. I can't find myself. And then there was a period of time that I kind of went, well, you're not a spiritual personality anymore. What would you do? And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think about other things that I could do in the world, because I knew it doesn't really matter. You can be a potter, you can be a maid, you can be a factory worker, you can be a mailman, you can be a teacher, you can be whatever life finds you as. And if you're awake, that's perfectly in place and perfectly whole. So I didn't have this hierarchy in my mind, but it was a real loss because I really didn't have ambition and ideas of what I wanted to do when I grew up, and it just wasn't there. So, like all phases, the mind starts to unwind, and that's what it's doing. It's just simply unwinding its fears, its deep-seated sense of not being whole, not whatever your mind wants to hold. And if you have a really strong sense of defense and protection, and and that's a loving place because it, you simply couldn't. You were too sensitive, too open, too transparent to live in the world without these defenses and protections. So that will be flushed up. You'll get to see them. Or maybe you're a perfectionist, and everything is going to be like very perfectly in place, and you're perfect, and whatever, and that will fall into ashes as well. And so there's usually a period of what I just call unwinding. And the unwinding is the mind who's objecting. And it's not like a separate entity. It's just the contents of the mind start to unwind because this no self, this absorption coming back into what you have always been, but that separate sense of uniqueness, that separate sense of identity, all of that is just being washed away. I know I've talked about this before. I know I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. That's when if practitioners veer off, they veer off there. It's too much. None of us signed up for the complete dissolution of our separate self. Because you can't know it until it starts to unfold within your life. If Awareness, however, is bright enough. It is celebrating and loving and guiding and directing. Because you can't find many teachers that talk about it, and you can't find much written about it. And so one way or the other, you're either going to find a guide or a teacher, and that will help walk you through and clarify what's happening. Or your awareness is bright enough that you start to just follow what's being revealed and presented. And then it's realized, right? You get it.